Welcome, everybody, to Uniting for Hope, Day 2, and thank you for tuning in to our Strategies for Healthy Living presentation today. I'm here with Dr. Shannon Armbruster, and we're so excited to hear her presentation. It's a really insightful talk on how we can best optimize our health and well-being through diet and nutrition and exercise. So, and we will have the opportunity for a few Q&As at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to submit them through the chat.
It's great to be here. So I am looking forward to discussing some tips and strategies and data about how to live a healthy life after cancer. And so let's get started. So I have no disclosures to report, but I will say that I feel better when I eat better, and I'm a happier person when I move. And so I feel like those feelings have driven my passion for the survivorship research I do, and one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here with everyone today. So for our agenda, we'll review the nutrition recommendations for survivors, talk about some frequently asked dietary topics, go into the physical activity and inactivity risks associated with cancer, the national guidelines, as well as why it's important to be physically active. And then we'll wrap up with some kind of tips on how to actually change behaviors. So we know that 50% of cancers can be attributable to kind of modifiable lifestyle decisions. And when we dig a little bit further into that, about 20% of them are related to things about activity and our nutrition or our intake, specifically diet, alcohol intake, physical inactivity, and excess body weight. And we know that all of those four things are very much related to each other. So let's start with nutrition and survivorship. This is called the New American Plate. It was created by the American Institute for Cancer Research, and it's the recommendation about how we should be structuring our meals. And the recommendations are for 2/3 of our plate to be filled with plant-based foods. The other third or less can, but does not have to be animal protein. It's really important to remember, and a theme throughout this whole talk is going to be limiting red meat and processed meat. Those continue to come up in all of the guidelines. And when we're talking about fruits and vegetables, the recommendations are for 2.5 cups of non-starchy vegetables and fruits each day. And there's also a recommendation and kind of a newer focus now on focusing on plant-based protein as much as possible. And so, what is plant-based protein? There's a whole bunch of different options and way that we can get protein from plants, from potatoes to nuts to chia seeds, oatmeal, flaxseed, quinoa. And you can imagine there's different ways to incorporate these plant proteins throughout your day. For example, for breakfast, you could have oatmeal with some chia seeds. You can substitute out the quinoa for rice for dinner. Edamame or some of our nuts make great small snacks. So you have a wide variety of options, but there really is a push to really focus on this plant-based protein within our diet. So you'll also remember that, 2/3 of our plate were fruits and vegetables. And so why is that important? Well, it's challenging because few studies have really just looked at fruits and vegetables and the chance of reducing cancer coming back or improving survival. And that's just because there's so many factors that go into survival. There's so many factors that go into our diet. But what we do know is that when we look at an overall healthy diet pattern that does include fruits and vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, and again, back to the keeping a low amount of red meat and processed foods, that patients do have longer survivals, especially those with breast and prostate cancers. And it's not to say that there aren't benefits for other survivors of other cancers. We just haven't investigated all of these things in each individual cancer group. So the recommendations overall are to consume a variety of colorful vegetables and fruits each day because we don't know exactly what component of which fruit and which vegetable is beneficial, but as a whole, we know that they're protective. One of the things that if you're looking at increasing your fruits and vegetables, just to be mindful of is that depending on what country or location you're in, there's different regulations for pesticides with our fruits and our vegetables. So even though you're eating fruits and vegetables, you might be exposing yourself to pesticides. The Environmental Working Group in the United States comes up with a dirty dozen every year, and these are the kind of top produce items that have the most pesticides in them. And so this is just a reminder that make sure you thoroughly wash everything that you're purchasing unless you're growing it yourself and you know that you're not using these type of chemicals. So antioxidants are related to our fruits and vegetables, and they include things like vitamin C, vitamin E, um, and they're the compounds that give the fruits and vegetables their color. And they're also thought to help protect the body from chemical reactions associated with oxygen. The studies have been shown that people who eat more fruits and vegetables, which are rich in these antioxidants, do have a lower risk of some types of cancers. Now, there's a lot of supplements available that say that they're promoting antioxidants, but those supplements haven't necessarily been found to reduce the cancer risk. So the recommendations are that you should get your antioxidants if you can through foods rather than from supplements. Also, as supplements are as closely regulated as we would like. And that by doing that, we're decreasing the risk for second cancers. And that can be done by eating a variety of antioxidant rich foods throughout the entire day. I have just a few questions just to kind of keep everyone engaged and thinking throughout this presentation. And so my first is, which item do you think contains the most antioxidants? And you can just think about this yourself, and then I'll share the answer with you. So walnuts, blueberries, artichokes, or raspberries. And the answer is walnuts, actually. I think I would have chosen blueberries had I not prepared for this presentation, but nuts, again, are a great way to get antioxidants as well. I frequently get questions about soy and is soy safe, especially if I've had an estrogen related cancer. And the reason this question comes up are because soy contains phytoestrogens, which are the plant version of estrogen. But these are the key things to know is that phytoestrogens are actually structurally different and much weaker than human estrogen. And that if you eat phytoestrogen, it's not going to turn into estrogen in your body. And so a moderate intake of soy does not increase the risk of cancer growth. And there are studies in the breast cancer population that show that actually soy decreases the risk of breast cancer. So it is a safe way to get some protein. I think a lot of my patients also ask about organic foods. And, you know, organic foods, we would say, are plants that are grown without pesticides and genetic modification. And so it's thought that they're better for us because they're reducing our exposure to certain chemicals. However, at this time, there haven't been studies that have been done in humans to really show the correlation of eating organic foods and the risk of cancer progression, recurrence, or anything of that matter. So if you're able and have access to organic foods, that it's recommended to consider them, but it's not a hard and fast recommendation based on scientific evidence. So fats, you know, there's the high fat diet, low fat diet, all of those things. The challenge with high fat diets are that they're high in calories, and having extra weight on us has been clearly tied to developing certain types of cancers, as well as increasing the risk of recurrence and even death for certain cancer types. We also know that saturated fat is a known risk factor for heart disease, which is one of the major causes of death for women who identify as females. So kind of the recommendation to stay away from those kind of saturated fats can be guided by following a Mediterranean diet. And so what that is it's very similar to the portion plate we saw at the beginning of the presentation. It's eating fruits and vegetables and whole grains and plant-based fats. using extra virgin olive oil, having fish, poultry, beans, legumes, and eggs every week, and having moderate portion of dairy products and limiting foods that have added sugar and are red meats. Some other elements that kind of relate more to the behavioral and some of the physical activity side of the Mediterranean diet are sharing meals with family and friends and actually using time to connect with each other, as opposed to just eating our food so quickly and then being done with our meal. When we're actually aware of if we're hungry and when we're full, we can help ourselves from overeating. The Mediterranean diet also kind of recommends regular exercise. And if you're going to choose to drink alcohol, enjoy wine in moderation. Sugar. So there's a lot of data out there that sugar feeds cancer. And there is not data to show that sugar intake increases the risk of getting cancer or having kind of a worse prognosis. However, we do know that sugars and sugar sweetened drinks add a large amount of calories to our diet, and especially when in liquid form, doesn't help us feel full. So they're very empty calories. And they can also cause weight gain, which we know can impact cancer outcomes. So the recommendation is a moderate intake of foods and drinks with added sugar. And I think it's important, this figure is from MD Anderson, to note that there's different ways that we can kind of get sugar in our diet. There's natural sugar, there's sugar in fruits. We're well aware of that. And that's okay if you're eating it as part of a balanced, healthy diet. There's also added sugar added to our foods. And the recommendations for women is to keep that below 25 grams per day, and for men, 37 grams per day. And then sweets, no matter how much we love them, we really need to try to limit them as much as possible. So I mentioned supplements earlier. There's really no data supporting the use of supplements outside of correcting for deficiencies that your providers have identified. It's really important to try to get as many of the nutrients as you can through food and just not through supplements. What do we know about diet and ovarian cancer? There's very limited evidence about the role of diet related to ovarian cancer prognosis. There was a meta-analysis which kind of combines all the data from a large number of studies about fruit and vegetable consumption. And what it showed was that those survivors with high fruit and vegetable intake before diagnosis had lower mortality rates. There's been studies looking at doing a plant-based diet, and those have not been associated with ovarian cancer specific mortality. But there's no results yet of large randomized trials, which are our gold standard of care for evidence about the effect of lifestyle interventions, including those related to diet, on cancer recurrence and survival. The Gynecologic Oncology Group has a big ongoing national trial for ovarian cancer survivors looking at physical activity and diet interventions. But only last year they presented their recruitment data. Their overall outcome is going to be progression-free survival. So we don't expect data from that for quite some time. To put into context, we started looking at chemotherapy to treat cancer back in the 1970s. And so we don't have a lot of data for diet or even physical activity in cancer survivors, but there's a lot of us, including myself, that are very interested in these topics and look forward to kind of exploring things and getting more data for survivors and for providers moving forward. So a few nutritional tips. Increase the fruits and vegetables you eat. You can do this a variety of ways, but sometimes you could just increase the percentage of produce on your plate, or you can try to increase the number of servings per day, adding them in as a snack, adding strawberries on top of your oatmeal in the morning, adding them to things that you're already eating. As I mentioned earlier, try to eat a rainbow of fruits and vegetables and colors in your food throughout the day or week. That really does help to ensure that you're getting a balance of vitamins and minerals from your food. Snack on healthy foods such as fruit, vegetables, seeds, and nuts. I find that when I make a plan for the week or a plan for the day ahead of the time and set myself up for success by pre-portioning out whatever I'm going to eat, I'm much more likely to make a healthy decision as opposed to when I have 5 minutes and those M&Ms look great. So if I already have my little container of nuts or my banana next to me, I'm much more likely to make a better decision. Again, try to reduce red meat and processed meats. Instead, choose fish, seafood, or poultry, or sometimes even go back to those plant-based proteins we talked about earlier. Whole grains and other whole food carbohydrates are much better than processed carbohydrates. You can use vegetables to kind of replace those noodles, such as with spaghetti squash or even vegetable noodles instead of just using pasta. And you could also consider replacing white rice with brown rice or quinoa. You can consider eating a salad as your meal if you include nuts, seeds, or beans as a protein source that will help to keep you full, or at least start your meal off with a salad because there's a lot of fiber and low calories that will help you feel full faster. And again, back to that intuitive eating, making sure that you can feel full without feeling stuffed and then stopping. It's also important, and another tip for success is to eat a fruit for your dessert. And again, have that planned ahead of time. I had talked about kind of using the body's cues for hunger and being full. You should feel like after you're done eating that you could still take a walk around the block. If you feel like you can't get up and we're, as we say in America, post Thanksgiving and we just need to lay on the couch, that means that you've ate too much. And so, again, stopping eating when you feel like you can still walk around a block. And similarly, when you're hungry, when you start to feel that small gurgle of your stomach, that might be a better time to eat than when you're ravenous and you can't really control what you're going to eat. Sometimes for our survivors, it's not about losing weight, but it's actually trying to keep the weight on. And so I wanted to include a slide about some tips for survivors who might be struggling with weight gain. One option is to eat several small snacks throughout the day rather than 3 large meals. Eat your favorite food at any time of the day. We tend to think that scrambled eggs is for breakfast, but if that's your favorite thing, it's okay to have for lunch or even a mid afternoon snack. And sometimes it's important to eat your biggest meal when you feel hungriest, not necessarily when it's the quote time of the day to eat it. There's a lot of different other opportunities for having more high calorie, high protein foods that come in smaller amounts. And those can be in protein shakes and nutrition bars and puddings. And so that is another way to try to make sure you're getting the most nutrition you can when you're not able to ingest as much as you used to. And one of the other tips, is to take a short leisurely walk before your meals because sometimes that can just increase your appetite just a little bit. I provided some additional nutritional resources for anyone who's interested. Okay, moving on to physical activity and survivorship. We'll start with our question. So how many minutes per week should survivors be completing of moderate intensity activity? 30, 90, 100, or 150 minutes? And the answer is 150 minutes. According to the American Cancer Society, survivors should be exercising regularly, and that's 150 to 300 minutes per week of moderate or 75 to 150 minutes per week of vigorous physical activity. And we'll go into the different classifications in subsequent slides. They also recommend strength training 2 days a week. It's interesting that that recommendation is including full body strength training. And so I don't know that there's very many of us that go to the gym and only or that work out our whole entire body. Usually it's legs day or arms day or something like that. So in order to meet these requirements, it often requires more than quote 2 days per week to get those strength training exercises in. They also recommend avoiding inactivity. That sedentary time, as we'll talk about in a few slides, is detrimental as well. They recommend starting slow with the length and intensity of any activity. If you haven't been active and exercising 150 minutes per week, then I recommend my patients think about how active they have been. And so maybe that's 20 minutes per week. And then they should set a reasonable goal of maybe 30 minutes per week and then build upon that. Going from a very low activity level to a very high activity level is not setting ourselves up for success and likely to cause a lot of frustration and not kind of support continued growth of our activity level. It's also really exciting, I think, that individuals have looked at the benefits of one short bout or multiple short bouts of physical activity compared to a long session and seen similar benefits across that. So meaning if you do 3 10-minute segments of physical activity, that's equal to 30 minutes of a session. And I think that seems a lot more attainable for us who are very busy and have a lot of things to do. I can carve out 10 minutes at multiple points in my day, but maybe trying to do 45 minutes all at one time is just too overwhelming. But they're both beneficial ways to get your activity in. This is a figure showing how we classify physical activity based on our exertional level. And our physical activity guidelines, as we show, kind of encompass the two different areas together. One is sedentary behavior, avoid inactivity, and the other is looking at the intensity of activity and can we reach that 150 minutes per week. So to classify activity levels a little bit further, light activity is when we're not exerting ourselves. It's a casual stroll where you can have a long-winded conversation and you can just kind of keep talking. Moderate activity is more like a power walk. You can get out one sentence, you might have to take a breath, and then you can keep talking. Vigorous physical activity, on the other hand, is you're very breathless. You can get out just a few words, but your main focus is on that activity. And examples of that are jogging, jumping rope, and swimming. So, why does physical activity matter? Well, physical activity has been associated with lower risks of the following cancers. And you can see the dots listed here showing black or strong evidence, and the gray dots are for moderate strength of evidence. Similarly, people have looked at sedentary behavior. And so if you sit for more than 6 to 8 hours per day, you have an increased risk of lung, colorectal, and endometrial cancer. You'll notice the data for this is moderate. And that's because this idea of sedentary behavior being a separate risk factor from kind of the activity of inactivity is very different. And what I mean by that is that I can get up in the morning and 5 days a week do moderate physical activity for 30 minutes and hit my 150 minutes. But if I sit for the whole rest of the day, I am still a sedentary person and I am still at risk for cancer detriments. And so those two things are very different, and we're still beginning to kind of tease out the risks associated with each. So, why do we think that being physically active can help with cancer risk reduction? We think it's because exercise has biological effects on the body, including lowering sex hormones and growth factors that have been associated with cancer development and progression, preventing high levels of insulin, which can be linked or which have been linked to cancer development and progression. Exercise reduces inflammation and improves the immune system and can also help prevent obesity. I wanted to throw this slide in here because obesity, being overweight or obese, has been tied to 13 different cancer types. And so we all know, unfortunately, just because we've had one cancer doesn't mean that there's not a chance of getting another cancer. And so all of these reasons about watching our diet and having healthy nutrition and being physically active can help maintain our weight and help reduce the chance of getting a second cancer. This was a study that was done quite some time ago, but the data still holds true. And what they did was they looked at individuals who classified themselves as female and looked at their minutes per week of moderate to vigorous physical activity. And what I just wanted to show was that across the board, no one's meeting their milestones. Those are individuals without cancer and individuals with cancer. And so, one of the main strategies that I use in my research to help survivors exercise is to include social support. And these data help support that. The people that you interact with around you that you could use as part of your support system to help encourage each other to exercise aren't meeting their national recommendations either, which for the record are the same. That 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity are also the same recommendations for individuals without cancer. A little bit more about the benefits of physical activity during survivorship. There have been studies that have shown improvements in heart and lung fitness, strength, your body composition, which is the ratio of fat to muscle, improvements in balance, reduced risk of a second cancer, reduced risk of other chronic diseases, improvements in the immune system, and increases in appetite. Additionally, physical activity can help with mental and emotional health. Survivors who exercise are more likely to have higher self-esteem, feel happier, have better quality of life, sleep better, have better sexual function. They're also less likely to have fatigue, psychosocial distress, depression, and anxiety. Yoga is another way that we can move our bodies, and it's also a nice way to introduce movement in a slow way, especially chair yoga for patients who haven't had a lot of experience with exercise before. And studies have shown benefits in anxiety, depression, distress, stress levels, as well as in their physical function. So just a few activity suggestions. Take or leave whatever of these work for you, but incorporating a walk around the neighborhood after dinner that actually ties back to our nutrition piece and not overeating. If you don't overeat, then you'll be able to kind of set yourself up for that walk after dinner. Doing chores outside like gardening, raking, mowing the grass are all good things to help get your heart rate up and exercise. Doing things around the house like cleaning, washing and waxing the car, taking the dog on a walk, all of those things that we do as part of our normal routine, that if we're intent and we really focus on completing those chores well, can raise our heart rate and count as exercise. One of the things that's also beneficial is wearing a pedometer, which can count your steps, or maybe some type of watch or device on our wrist that tells us how active we are. They have things that kind of ping us every hour to make sure that we're standing up and not staying sedentary all the time, and also provides us some reinforcement about what exactly we're doing in our day-to-day life. There are some things that I just want to throw out as precautions, that if you happen to have severe anemia or low blood counts because of your treatment, you should consider delaying exercise until your anemia has improved. Related to anemia, some of our patients have fatigue. And depending on that level of fatigue, if it's mild, just doing a 10-minute walk or a 10-minute light exercise can really help improve fatigue. If you're severely fatigued, though, it's okay to give your body a break. If you're undergoing radiation, avoid chlorine, exposure to the irradiated skin. If you happen to have a catheter or a feeding tube, be very careful when you're in bodies of water, or if you're doing resistance training, as those catheters can get dislodged. If you have multiple or uncontrolled health conditions and you haven't been exercising before, it's always a good idea to talk to your provider before you start an exercise regimen. And if you happen to have numbness and tingling in your arms, legs, hands, or feet, neuropathy from either treatments or diabetes, try to make sure that you're in a safe place and not in a place where you can lose your balance. Doing things like, or using things like a stationary reclined bike or even a seated bike instead of walking on a treadmill is much safer. Here's from the Center for Disease Control some exercises that are recommended for adults. And I think this just ties back into what we talked about earlier with the guidelines, in that there are aerobic activities that we need to do to get our heart rate up to meet that moderate to vigorous physical activity. But we also need to make sure that we're doing strength training activities as well. And they don't necessarily mean going to the gym and lifting weights. You can use handheld weights at home. You can even use big cans of soup You can get creative and look around your house for different ways to kind of use and move your body. And some of my patients like to use commercial breaks during TV as their cue to stand up, to not be sedentary, and maybe grab a set of weights to get their muscles going. There have been studies that have looked at physical activity during treatment, and there are benefits to a combination of aerobic and resistance training. And they've shown reductions in fatigue. It helps to preserve the heart and lung function, the physical function, and the muscle strength during treatment. And for some populations, has improved quality of life and reduces depression and anxiety. So, data about physical activity in ovarian cancer. There's really there's data that's combined data from studies looking at ovarian, endometrial, and cervical cancers that have looked at the potential of pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis physical activity to improve or impact cancer survival. And so right now, there isn't an association between pre-diagnosis physical activity and survival for patients with female reproductive cancer. However, survivors who have the highest levels of post-diagnosis physical activity did have a lower risk all-cause mortality compared to those in the least active cohort. And so that's death caused by any cause, not death specifically caused by cancer. I am encouraged by this diagram. So what this is it's a graph of cancer survivors who report not being physically active in their leisure time. And we can see that that percentage was well above 50% in 1996. And we're heading down to about 35% in 2020 when this data was last presented. And so my hope and my optimism is that we have a growing group of researchers and clinicians that are excited and see the value in physical activity and are doing a better job of talking to our survivors about these things and the benefits. And thus, we're seeing more survivors who are being active. Here's some additional physical activity resources. And I'm going to spend just the last few moments or the last few slides on behavior change. Behavior change is really hard. And as a behavior interventionist, someone who does research about behavior change, if you look at most of the behavioral interventions, there's three key components to most of them. And they include goal setting, self-monitoring, and getting some type of feedback. It's really important that our goals are SMART goals. And I have a slide, we'll talk about that on the next slide. Self-monitoring means you have to hold yourself accountable for what you're doing, and yourself, an app, or someone else needs to provide some type of feedback. We're lucky in the era of smartphones that a lot of our feedback can be visual in our graphs. If we're monitoring our physical activity or we're logging what we eat, that is really helpful to reinforce what we're doing, help us see where our gaps are and how we can fill those in. So what is a SMART goal? It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and realistic, and time-based. So for example, if my specific goal is that I want to lose 5 pounds, I'm going to measure that by weighing myself on a scale, and that will be accomplished by a weight change from 255 pounds down to 250. The actions I'm going to take to achieve that goal are that I'm not going to snack after 6 p.m. The achievable part, is very much related to the individual who's setting the goal. Some people are not able to give up their snacks. Some people are not able to give up their sugar sweetened beverages, their soda pops. I know for me, I love chocolate. And so me saying that I'm going to lose this weight by giving up chocolate is not an achievable goal. So again, when you're setting your SMART goal, that achievable portion is really key. R is it relevant and realistic? So do I have confidence that I can succeed in this plan? And if I succeed, what am I going to gain from that? I'm going to gain confidence in myself. And then T is time-based. We have to put an endpoint on our goal. We're procrastinators by nature. So Overall, this goal would look like I will lose 5 pounds by December 1st by not snacking after 6 p.m., which will make my weight 250 pounds and will help to improve my confidence. I also wanted to just briefly mention social cognitive theory. There's many different theories about behavioral change, but this is the one that I tend to use in my interventions and how I design them. And so I think it's important to share with survivors so you can think about how this applies to your life as you're making your mini intervention for yourself. So social cognitive theory thinks about things on a personal level as well as the social environment. So on a personal level, there's the outcome expectations, which are the perceptions and values of the behavior's impact on my health. If I lose weight, I am going to be healthier and more able to engage with my children and grandchildren. Our behavioral capacity, which is the skills and knowledge to engage in the targeted behaviors. We talked a lot about that today. In this presentation, there was a lot of knowledge and tips that enhance behavioral capacity. Self-efficacy is that confidence to engage in the behavior and overcome obstacles. And so that also requires a little bit of self-reflection. If you have achieved your goal and you are exercising, oh, I am confident, I am doing this, I am getting better, and I can keep doing it. Goal intention is the self-given instructions to complete the behavior to achieve the outcomes. I need to get up this morning and complete my 10 minutes of exercise because this is how I'm going to get stronger. Having those mantras or those kind of pre-prepared rationale in your head will help you during those times where you might waffle. And that has to do with self-regulation as well, your ability to control your behavior, manage your thoughts and emotions. That second layer of social cognitive theory is your social environment. So that's looking at the behaviors of those around you and also having positive reinforcements for engaging that behavior. And that's why in my interventions, I invite my survivors to have support team members and people that they self-select to go through the intervention with them. So they're changing their environment. You're not doing it in isolation. We all know that if we have a plate of cookies and you could smell them fresh out of the oven and you're not eating it and everyone else is, it's going to be a lot harder for you to not do that. But if everybody has decided we're not eating chocolate chip cookies, then it makes everyone's success, our chance for success, much higher. So back to the social cognitive theory, you have those personal and those social environment skills that impact the behavior. And then that behavior impacts physical health, quality of life, as well as our survivorship outcomes. And it's all kind of related together. I think that the best things that we can do are interact with each other as survivors, as caregivers, as support team members, as researchers, as providers. And that's when we do our best work and where we find out the most about each other. In that vein, I just want to thank my research team. I'd like to thank the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance for allowing me to talk today and you all for your attention. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Armbruster, for that insightful presentation. A lot of really valuable guidance and plenty of simple practical tips that I think we can all implement to try to optimize our health going forward. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. We did have some great questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and get started with some of the questions that were already asked. If you do have more, feel free to let us know. But we can start off. We had a few questions about blood cell count and recommendations in terms of incorporating meat into your diet at an increased level if that's something that you are experiencing.
So sometimes patients do have anemia. I think that might be where those questions were coming from. And, red meat within moderation is okay. There's also other sources of iron, such as like beans and legumes and spinach. So there's definitely other ways to do it. And if you are going to choose red meat, trying to stay away from the processed red meat and try to have a little bit more lean cuts to try to help decrease the amount of fat is a great way to go about that.
Thank you.
Someone asked about for the dirty dozen produce items that you mentioned. Is water sufficient for washing off potential pesticides, or should another cleaning product be used?
Water is typically fine. There are different recommendations. The cooperative extension has a whole page based on the different produce and how to wash them off. But typically, washing or soaking with water is just fine.
All right. We had a question about legumes and other foods that might cause either bloating or gassiness, and whether you would recommend consumption for individuals who might be having some GI symptoms as a result of their treatment.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the nice thing about the plant-based protein or that there's a variety of ways to kind of get that protein. And there's definitely there are some people who have more sensitivity to those legumes and beans than others. And so I would recommend trying different types and seeing which ones upset, if they're ones that upset your GI tract versus not, and then going towards the ones that are not quite as distressing for you. But I wouldn't go ahead and eat those items if they're decreasing your quality of life.
Do you have any recommendations regarding omega-3 consumption?
So in general, eating foods that are high in omega-3 are very safe. And that's usually the best way to get omega-3. Most of our data shows that if we could get our all of our extra vitamins, minerals, and supplements actually through the food themselves, as opposed to in a supplement form, that is the best way. It's hard because these supplements aren't regulated very closely by the FDA. And so it's hard to know what other things are put in those supplements. And so, and also then how those supplements could potentially interact with other drugs as well. So there's a lot of different layers to that.
Thanks. We also had a question about, describing processed meat and what makes meat processed. Is that due to nitrates or
Yes.
some other?
Yes, due to nitrates and and some of the different chemicals that are used to actually like preserve those meats as well. And so when we think about processed meats, we're thinking about kind of hot dogs and sausages and meats that aren't necessarily kind of in their kind of like true natural form.
What foods would you recommend eating to increase magnesium?
Oh, that is a great question. I don't know if I know off the top of my head, but I'm happy to message back about those things.
Sure.
That's a great question.
No problem at all.
What
else do we have here?
Yeah, we had, do you have any recommendations for the number of steps that people should aim for in a day?
So there's been talk about trying to hit 10,000 steps per day. I think if steps is a valuable tool for you, feel free to hit that 10,000 mark. I think that, again, just by hitting the 10,000 steps, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've raised your heart rate up enough to count as moderate to vigorous physical activity. And it can also be done like in short segments of time. And so you can still be sedentary as well. So I think it's great to, if that is a good benchmark for you, use that, but just be mindful of kind of all of the other components involved in physical activity as well.
Somebody's asking about the keto diet approach. If you have any thoughts there, they mentioned that this seems to work for a lot of cancer patients, but that it's not welcomed by the SOC oncologists.
So the challenge with the keto diet is that, we don't have prospective data from actual humans. There was a presentation presented at our national meeting a few years ago that was a study done actually in mice. So again, but mice with ovarian cancer, and they were given different diets. And the mice who actually had the keto diet had more tumor progression than those that didn't. So again, this is a mouse model. This isn't a human model, so we don't know for sure. I think one of the things, and this is based on my personal thoughts, not valid. I don't have scientific evidence behind it. Sometimes the keto diet can be a little bit stressful on the body, and we do know that stress is not helpful for cancer. And so I just wonder if there might be some type of connection there. So I think that's why, in general, all of the large kind of national organizations recommend kind of a well-based, well-rounded diet as opposed to like a strictly keto diet. I can come back to that magnesium question.
Okay, sure.
There's
Thank you.
so magnesium you can get from bananas, avocados, almonds, oatmeal, tofu, spinach, dark chocolate are some of the highest food sources for magnesium.
Thank you.
No problem.
Great. So I think we will do just one more question and then we will wrap up. Thank you. So for those of us who may be experiencing multiple comorbidities that may limit diet or activity, when should we seek personalized advice and from whom?
I think there's never a bad time to seek personalized advice about what's going on. I think that there's different individuals who can really help you. Sometimes your oncologist, I know I love talking to my patients about this and being able to connect them with kind of either physical therapists or nutritionists throughout our cancer center. I feel like if your oncologist isn't someone that you feel can help you with this, your primary care provider should also be. There's also multiple organizations, including the Foundation for Women's Cancer, just as one of them, that have webinars and videos that are available for free on their website that you can access that might give you some tips and some tricks as well. That would be things that could kind of fall within your realm of things that you'd be able to do.
Thank you. And I know we said last question, but I'll ask just one more because I saw there were a couple of related questions that came in at the end. A few people asking about your thoughts on intermittent fasting.
So great question. Similarly, there's not as much data for that, and I am not aware of any mouse model data for that either. There's definitely has been weight loss associated with it. It always makes me a little bit concerned about the level of stress that the body's undergoing during those times where there's no nutrition, but I don't have any kind of solid evidence to kind of back that statement.
Thank you. And thank you so much to Dr. Armbruster for being here for this amazing presentation, and to all of you for attending and asking questions and being so engaged. I think we all learned a lot today, and we'll all be leaving with a lot of great recommendations going forward.